The champagne tasted like ash in her mouth, each bubble a tiny explosion of a life that was no longer hers. 7 months pregnant, standing on the deck of a $300 million super yacht, Isabella should have been the radiant queen of this floating kingdom. But her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her, had just raised a glass to another woman. He stood before a crowd of the world's most powerful people, his arm wrapped around a stunning imposter, and with a voice as cold as the diamonds on his wrist, he declared, "To my real queen." This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's the story of what happens when a woman stripped of everything decides to build an empire from the ashes of her husband's betrayal. The Mediterranean sun was a benevolent god, casting a blinding diamond-like shimmer across the azure waters of the Côte d'Azur. The air in Saint-Tropez tasted of salt and money. From the tender that ferried them from the old port, Isabella could see it, the Olympian. It wasn't just a yacht. It was a testament to her husband's indomitable will, a 110-meter behemoth of gleaming white steel and smoked glass that dwarfed every other vessel in the bay. Julian Sterling didn't just acquire things, he conquered them. Isabella rested a protective hand on the gentle swell of her belly. At 7 months, the baby was a constant comforting presence, a secret conversation happening just beneath her skin. This party, the annual Sterling Industries Summer Gala, was meant to be their crowning moment. The announcement of their first child, the heir to the Sterling fortune, was supposed to be the jewel in the evening's crown. Nervous Julian's voice, smooth and deep, like aged whiskey, vibrated beside her. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the yacht, a proud, possessive glint in his sapphire eyes. He was handsome in a way that seemed almost unfair, a chiseled jaw, sun-streaked blonde hair, swept back perfectly, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and charm seasoned investors in equal measure. He wore a crisp white linen shirt, unbuttoned just enough to reveal the top of his tanned chest, and bespoke trousers that screamed casual wealth. A little Isabella admitted, her voice a soft murmur. "It's a lot." "Nonsense, my love." He finally turned to her, his smile softening as he took in her appearance. She wore a custom-made Grecian gown of sapphire blue silk that fell in elegant folds over her pregnant form. A delicate diamond necklace, a gift from him, rested against her collarbone. "You are the most beautiful woman here. You are my wife. You are the mother of my son. Never forget that." He leaned in and kissed her temple, a gesture that once would have sent a jolt of pure joy through her. Tonight, it felt practiced. For the past few months, a subtle chill had crept into the corners of their seemingly perfect life. It was in the hushed phone calls he'd take on the terrace, the late-night board meetings that became more frequent, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over when she spoke of baby names or nursery decorations. She'd dismissed it as the stress of his latest acquisition, a multi-billion-dollar media conglomerate. He was always conquering. As they stepped aboard the Olympian, the world transformed into a symphony of opulence. A string quartet played softly near the bow. Waitstaff, in pristine white uniforms, moved silently through the crowd, offering flutes of vintage Dom Perignon and canapés topped with beluga caviar and gold leaf. The guests were a blur of couture gowns, gleaming watches, and faces she recognized from the covers of Forbes and Vogue. They were the titans of industry, European aristocracy, and the occasional A-list celebrity, all orbiting the sun that was Julian Sterling. "Isabella, darling, you look absolutely radiant." The greeting came from Beatrice Dubois, a Parisian socialite whose husband sat on the board of a major French bank. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were sharp, scanning Isabella from head to toe. In this world, every compliment was also an assessment. "Thank you, Beatrice. You look stunning as always." Isabella exchanged the requisite air kisses, her own smile feeling like a mask she was struggling to keep in place. Julian was already in his element, gliding through the crowd, a handshake here, a booming laugh there. He was a master puppeteer, and this was his stage. Isabella followed in his wake, the perfect, adoring pregnant wife. She chatted with a tech billionaire about his latest rocket launch, and nodded along as a German industrialist complained about tax regulations. She played her part, the role she had been groomed for since marrying Julian 3 years ago. She had been an ambitious corporate lawyer with a promising career, but Julian had convinced her to give it up. "Why would my queen need to work?" he had said. "Your purpose is to be by my side." And she, blinded by love and the sheer force of his personality, had agreed. An hour into the party, a strange restlessness began to take hold. Julian, who usually kept her anchored to his side at these events, had disappeared towards the yacht's upper deck with a group of his closest advisors. The smiles of the other guests seemed to stretch a little too thin. The whispers behind cupped hands seemed to follow her as she moved to get a glass of sparkling water. She could feel a shift in the atmosphere, a low thrum of anticipation that had nothing to do with her or the baby. Her hand went to her belly again, a primal protective instinct. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump. "It's just you and me, little one," she thought, a sudden inexplicable wave of loneliness washing over her amidst the throng of people. She found a quiet spot near the stern, away from the main crush, looking back at the glittering lights of Saint-Tropez. The sea breeze felt cool against her flushed cheeks. Where was Julian? He had promised they would make the announcement together at 10 p.m. It was already 9:45. Just as a knot of real anxiety began to tighten in her chest, the music from the string quartet swelled and then abruptly stopped. A hush fell over the entire yacht. Every head turned towards the grand staircase that led down from the upper deck. And then she saw him. Julian stood at the top of the stairs, a microphone in his hand. He looked impossibly grand, bathed in the soft glow of the deck lights. But he was not alone. Standing beside him, her hand possessively tucked into the crook of his arm, was another woman. She was tall, impossibly slender, and poured into a backless, blood-red dress that seemed to cling to her like a second skin. Her hair was a cascade of raven-black curls, and her face was a masterpiece of sharp angles and predatory beauty. She was breathtaking, and Isabella had never seen her before in her life. Julian's voice, amplified by the yacht's sound system, boomed across the silent deck. "My friends, my esteemed colleagues, thank you all for joining me tonight on this magnificent vessel. For years I have sailed these seas, built my empire, and searched for something real, something to match the fire in my own soul." His eyes scanned the crowd, deliberately, cruelly passing right over Isabella without a flicker of recognition. It was as if she were a ghost, an invisible spectator to her own public execution. "I have always believed that a man is only as strong as the queen by his side," he continued, his voice dripping with a sincerity that was utterly false. He then turned his dazzling smile on the woman in red, lifting her hand to his lips. "And tonight, I want you all to meet her, the true mistress of this ship, the true empress of my heart." He paused, letting the drama hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic trapped bird. Her blood ran cold. This couldn't be happening. It was a joke, a nightmare. Any moment now he would laugh, point to Isabella, and say it was all a prank. But he didn't. His next words shattered the fragile shell of her world into a million irreparable pieces. My friends, raise your glasses to Serafina. My real queen, the name Serafina, slithered through the air like a venomous snake. It was exotic, dramatic, and utterly alien. As Julian spoke the words, "My real queen," a collective audible gasp rippled through the crowd. Champagne flutes froze halfway to lips. The polite, meaningless chatter ceased, entirely replaced by a thick, voyeuristic silence. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, once filled with feigned admiration for Isabella, now swiveled towards her, glinting with a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. Isabella felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. The gentle rocking of the yacht suddenly became a violent lurching. The glittering lights of the French Riviera blurred into a watercolor smear of pain. Her hand, which had been resting on her belly, clenched the silk of her gown, her knuckles turning white. The baby, as if sensing its mother's distress, was still and silent within her. On the staircase, Serafina preened under the spotlight. She leaned into Julian, a triumphant feline smile playing on her perfectly painted red lips. She met Isabella's gaze across the deck, and for a fleeting second, her eyes held not malice, but a cold, calculating victory. It was the look of a predator that had successfully cornered its prey. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a hostile takeover. Julian, oblivious or perhaps reveling in the destruction he was causing, continued his speech. Serafina is the embodiment of strength, passion, and ambition, the qualities that have built the sterling empire. She understands the sacrifices, the drive, the relentless pursuit of more. Every word was a poisoned dart aimed directly at Isabella's heart. He's talking about me, she realized with a sickening clarity. The sacrifices she had made, giving up her own legal career. The drive she had supported, staying up all night with him to review contracts and strategize deals. The relentless pursuit of more that she had tempered with calls for balance, for family, for a life beyond the boardroom. He was twisting their entire history, recasting her as a weak, conventional burden he was now heroically shedding. A few sycophants and business associates, their moral compasses long since demagnetized by Julian's wealth, began a scattered, hesitant applause. It was quickly taken up by others, eager to align themselves with the newly declared power structure. The sound was a deafening roar in Isabella's ears, the soundtrack to her public disgrace. Her legs felt weak, threatening to give way. She had to get out. She couldn't stand here, a living statue of humiliation for everyone to stare at. She turned her movements stiff and robotic and began to push her way through the crowd. The sea of faces parted for her. No one spoke to her. No one touched her. They just stared, their expressions a grotesque mural of pity and fascination. She was a car crash, and they couldn't look away. She could hear Julian's voice again, closer now. He and Serafina were descending the stairs, holding court. "Thank you, Dmitri. She's remarkable, isn't she?" "Ah, Beatrice, you must meet Serafina. She has the most exquisite taste in art." Isabella's path was blocked by Beatrice Dubois, the socialite who had complimented her just an hour before. The woman's face was a mask of horrified sympathy. "My dear," she whispered, reaching out a hand, but stopping short of actually touching her. I had no idea." The words were useless, empty platitudes that offered no comfort only confirmation of the nightmare. Isabella simply shook her head, unable to form words, and pushed past her. She had one destination in mind, the tender, the small boat that could take her away from this floating hell. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion and agony. How could this be happening? The man who had wept while proposing to her, who had held her hand during the first ultrasound, who had whispered promises of forever into her hair just this morning. How could he be the same man who had just publicly disemboweled her? As she neared the gangway where the tenders were docked, a firm hand gripped her arm. She flinched, spinning around to see Julian's head of security, a large, stoic man named Marcus. His face, usually impassive, held a flicker of something that looked like regret. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice low and professional. "Mr. Sterling requested that you be escorted to your suite to rest." "Let go of me," Isabella said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Ma'am, my orders are, I am not a prisoner on this yacht." She spat, finding a sliver of strength in her rage. "I am leaving. Get out of my way." The commotion had drawn attention. A few guests were looking over. Marcus, ever the professional, did not want a scene. He hesitated, his grip loosening slightly. In that moment, Julian's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Marcus, a problem." Julian was striding towards them, Serafina still clinging to his arm. His charming public facade had vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. His eyes, when they met Isabella's, were devoid of any warmth. They were the eyes of a stranger. "Isabella, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," he said, his voice low enough so only they and Marcus could hear. "You're overwrought. The pregnancy is making you emotional. Go to the suite. We will discuss this later." The condescension, the gaslighting was so profound, it momentarily took her breath away. "Discuss this," she finally managed to choke out, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "You just introduced your whore as your queen in front of everyone we know, and you want to discuss this later?" Serafina stiffened at the word whore, her beautiful face hardening. "You should watch your tone," she purred, her voice a low, threatening growl. "You're no longer in a position to make demands." "And what position is that?" Isabella shot back, her gaze locking with this woman who had stolen her life. "The pregnant wife, the one who is carrying his child, or does that not factor into your little corporate merger?" Julian's face darkened with rage. He took a step forward, his presence menacing. "That's enough," he hissed. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Isabella's voice rose, cracking with disbelief and pain. "You stand on a staircase and detonate our marriage, our family, and I'm the one who's embarrassing. Who are you?" The final question hung in the air between them, raw and desperate. He looked at her tear-streaked face, her trembling body, her swollen belly, and it was as if he were looking at a complete stranger who was inconveniencing him. "You know who I am," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "I am Julian Sterling, and I do what I want. Now go to the suite, or Marcus will take you there." It was not a request. It was a threat. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a bone-deep, chilling despair. She looked at the faces around them, Marcus's professional stoicism, Serafina's smug triumph, and Julian's cold, dismissive contempt. There was no help for her here. She was utterly, completely alone. Without another word, she turned her back on them. She didn't go towards the suite. With a dignity she didn't know she possessed, she walked straight towards the gangway. "Marcus!" Julian snapped, but Marcus didn't move. Perhaps it was the sight of the pregnant woman walking away with her world in tatters, or perhaps it was a rare flicker of human decency. He simply stood still. Isabella didn't look back. She walked down the gangway and onto the waiting tender, her bare feet silent on the teak deck. The boat operator, a young Frenchman, looked at her with wide, compassionate eyes, averting his gaze as if her pain were too bright to look at directly. "S'il vous plaît," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Take me to shore." He nodded, untying the ropes with practiced efficiency. As the tender's engine hummed to life and pulled away from the Olympian, Isabella finally allowed herself to look back. She saw Julian and Serafina standing at the railing, bathed in light, the king and his new queen already turning back to their adoring subjects. The laughter and music began to swell again, filling the void her departure had left. The yacht, her husband's monument to himself, looked like a monstrous, glittering beast on the dark water. And as the shore of Saint-Tropez grew closer, and the warm tears finally began to stream down her face, Isabella knew one thing for certain. The gilded cage had shattered, and she had just been thrown to the wolves. But even in her deepest despair, a tiny, cold spark of something other than pain began to ignite. It was fury, and it was the beginning of a war. The suite at the Hôtel de Paris Monte Carlo was a cavern of opulent silence. Isabella had fled St. Tropez, taking a taxi that wound its way along the dramatic coastal roads of the French Riviera, each glittering seaside town, a painful reminder of the life she had just lost. She had checked into the hotel under her maiden name, a name she hadn't used in 3 years, Isabella Rossi. The act itself felt both like a betrayal and a reclamation. For 48 hours, she existed in a fugue state. She didn't answer the dozens of calls from Julian or the texts that ranged from feigned concern, "Are you safe? I'm worried," to outright threats, "You are making a scene. We need to handle this privately." She ignored the calls from so-called friends, knowing their sympathy would be laced with a morbid desire for gossip. She barely ate. She sat on the balcony of her suite, wrapped in a hotel robe, staring out at the iconic Casino de Monte Carlo and the harbor filled with other people's perfect lives. The pain was a physical entity, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. It was the humiliation, the sheer theatrical cruelty of it. He hadn't just left her, he had annihilated her identity in a public spectacle. He had taken their shared life and presented it as a lie with her, as the foolish leading lady. Her mind replayed the scene on a torturous loop, Julian's booming voice, Serafina's triumphant smirk, the sea of staring faces. She felt the shame wash over her again and again, hot and acidic. How could she have been so blind? The late nights, the secret calls, his emotional distance. The clues had all been there, hiding in plain sight. She had chosen not to see them, cocooned, in the comforting belief that their love, their family, was inviolable. On the third morning, something shifted. The waves of grief began to recede, leaving behind the hard, jagged rocks of anger. She was looking at her reflection in the darkened television screen, a pale, hollowed-out woman with haunted eyes, and the sight disgusted her. This weeping, broken creature was not Isabella Rossi. Isabella Rossi had been at the top of her class at Yale Law. She had been a tenacious, brilliant associate at a top New York firm, known for her sharp mind and her refusal to be intimidated. Where had that woman gone? Julian had chiseled her away, piece by piece, replacing her ambition with her identity, with the title of Mrs. Sterling. And now he had taken that away too. A new thought, cold and clear, cut through the fog of her sorrow. He would not get away with this. This wasn't just about a broken heart. This was about survival. her survival and the survival of the child she was carrying. She knew Julian. His cruelty wasn't random, it was strategic. This public humiliation was a power play designed to leave her so shattered she would accept whatever crumbs he decided to throw her way in a divorce settlement. He wanted to control the narrative, to paint her as an unstable, emotional woman, while he rode off into the sunset with his new queen. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten who she was before he remade her in his image. Fueled by this nascent rage, she finally opened her laptop. Her fingers, at first clumsy, began to fly across the keyboard. She wasn't looking for news articles about the party, though she knew they would be there thinly veiled in society columns. She was looking for something else. A memory was nagging at her, a loose thread from a long time ago. About a year and a half ago, Julian had been in a panic. He was trying to acquire a struggling but innovative tech firm in Monaco, and the deal was incredibly complex, involving a web of offshore shell corporations. His own legal team was being overly cautious, and he was frustrated. One night, fueled by coffee and desperation, he had brought the files home. "You have a better mind for this than any of them," he'd said, his voice full of an admiration she now realized was purely utilitarian. "Find me a loophole, Izzy. Find me a way through." For a week, she had been his partner again. She'd pored over intricate financial statements, shareholder agreements, and incorporation documents from jurisdictions she barely recognized. She had loved it, the intellectual challenge, the feeling of being his equal. And she had found it. A weakness in the target company's structure that allowed for a hostile but legal takeover. But in the process, she had also seen the inner workings of his own financial empire. To facilitate the deal, he had to move massive amounts of capital quickly. He'd been sloppy, arrogant. He'd used a particular entity, a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands called Monaco Ventures Limited, as a personal slush fund. She remembered questioning him about it. "Isn't this risky?" she had asked, pointing to a wire transfer from the corporate account to a London jeweler. Commingling corporate and personal funds this blatantly, it could open you up to liability. Someone could argue to pierce the corporate veil. He had laughed, a dismissive, patronizing sound. "Darling, these are my companies, my money. The veil is for little people. No one would ever dare challenge me on it. It's untraceable." Untraceable. The word echoed in her mind. He believed he was untouchable above the law. His arrogance was his greatest weakness. Her heart began to beat faster, not with anxiety, but with purpose. This was it. This was the seed. She started a fresh document, her legal mind dormant for 3 years, roaring back to life. She began to map it out. The corporate structure of Sterling Industries, the key holding companies, the executive board he had stacked with yes men. And at the center of it all, she drew a box and labeled it Monaco Ventures Limited. She knew a divorce in a standard court would be a bloodbath. His lawyers would paint her as a gold digger, use her current emotional distress to question her fitness as a mother, and tie her up in litigation for years, bleeding her dry. He would hide his true wealth behind impenetrable layers of corporate ownership. A prenuptial agreement, which she had signed in a haze of love and trust, would leave her with a generous but ultimately insulting severance package, a pittance compared to his billions. But this was different. If she could prove that he treated his corporations not as separate legal entities, but as his own personal piggy bank, if she could prove gross misconduct and fraud, a court could be persuaded to pierce the corporate veil. It was a legal doctrine that was notoriously difficult to invoke, a legal Hail Mary. But if it worked, It would mean that the limited liability protection of his companies would vanish. His entire personal fortune, the yacht, the jets, the penthouse in New York, the mansion in the Hamptons, would be on the table. Every asset he owned would be exposed. It was a long shot, a gamble of epic proportions. She would need more than just a memory. She would need proof, hard, irrefutable evidence, bank statements, wire transfers, receipts, things that were almost certainly locked down tight. But she had something Julian's army of lawyers didn't. She had the memory of a wife who had been trusted, however briefly, with the keys to the kingdom. She remembered the names of the bankers, the specific turns of phrase he used, and she knew his biggest vulnerability, his ego. He had undoubtedly continued to use Monaco Ventures as his personal slush fund, likely to finance the lavish lifestyle of his new Queen Seraphina. He wouldn't have been able to resist showing off. A slow, cold smile spread across Isabella's face. It was the first time she had smiled in 3 days. Julian wanted a war. He had fired the first shot in the most public way imaginable, but he thought he would be fighting a broken, weeping victim. He had no idea he was about to go to war with Isabella Rossi, and she had just found the blueprint for his annihilation. She picked up her phone, not to call a friend, but to call the one person she knew who was as ruthless, brilliant, and discreet as she needed. "Professor Albright," she said, when the elderly man, with a legendary reputation in forensic accounting and corporate law, picked up. "It's Isabella Rossi. I need your help. I'm going to burn an empire to the ground." Professor Alistair Albright had been Isabella's mentor at Yale, a formidable old lion of corporate law who viewed the courtroom as a theater of war and legal statutes as his arsenal. He was semi-retired, spending his days writing scathing critiques of modern financial regulations from his book-lined study in Connecticut. When Isabella called, he listened to her entire story without interruption, the silence on his end of the line, a sign of deep concentration, not disinterest. When she finished, his voice was dry as parchment. "Julian Sterling. I remember his type. Men who believe they are modern-day gods, forgetting that even gods can be toppled by hubris. So you want to pierce the corporate veil. A beautiful, audacious, and nearly impossible strategy. I love it. Can it be done?" Alistair, Isabella asked, her voice tight with a mixture of hope and fear. "The law, my dear Isabella, is not a rigid structure. It is a tapestry. If you pull on the right thread, the entire thing can unravel. Mr. Sterling's mistake was showing you the thread. Our job is to pull it." That conversation was the beginning of Isabella's transformation. The grief didn't vanish, but it was transmuted, forged into a cold, hard resolve. The hotel suite in Monaco ceased to be a refuge and became a war room. Under Albright's long-distance guidance, Isabella began the painstaking work of building her case. Her first move was strategic, a feint designed to lull Julian into a false sense of security. She had her family lawyer, a quiet, unassuming man from her hometown, send a standard, almost meek letter to Julian's legal team, initiating divorce proceedings and referencing the existing prenuptial agreement. It was the move of a defeated woman, exactly what he would expect. Julian's lead counsel, a shark named Harrison Croft, responded with patronizing swiftness, agreeing to the terms of the prenup and adding a clause that required a strict, non-disclosure agreement about all aspects of their marriage. The subtext was clear: take the money and disappear quietly. Julian himself even sent a text: "I'm glad you're being sensible, Isabella. This is for the best. Once this is settled, we can arrange for generous child support. I will always take care of my own. My own." The possessiveness, the arrogance of it stoked the fire in her belly. She replied with a simple, "I agree. Let's be civil." He had no idea that while his lawyers were drafting settlement papers, Isabella was engaged in a very different kind of work. Guided by Albright, she began to assemble a mosaic of Julian's financial life. She started with what she knew: the name of the private banker at a boutique Swiss bank who handled the Monaco Ventures account, a man named Jean-Luc Fournier. The approximate dates of the acquisition she had helped with. The jeweler he had wired money to. "We need access." Isabella Albright's voice crackled over the encrypted line. "We need an inside track. Think. Who on his staff felt loyalty to you, not just to his money?" Isabella's mind raced. Most of the staff were terrified of Julian, their loyalty bought and paid for. But there was one person. His junior executive assistant, a young, bright woman named Chloe. Julian had hired her straight out of college, and he often treated her with casual cruelty, belittling her in meetings and overloading her with menial tasks. Isabella had always made a point to be kind to Chloe, asking about her family, remembering her birthday, offering a word of encouragement. On several occasions, she had seen the young woman crying in the restroom after a tirade from Julian. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. She found Chloe on social media and sent a carefully worded message asking to meet for a coffee, framing it as a simple goodbye. They met in a quiet cafe in Nice, far from Julian's usual haunts. Chloe was nervous, her eyes darting around as if expecting Julian to burst through the door. "I was so sorry to hear about what happened," Chloe began, her voice barely a whisper. "It was horrible, what he did." "Thank you, Chloe," Isabella said, her voice gentle. "I know you're in a difficult position. I wouldn't ask you to be here if it wasn't desperately important." Isabella laid it out, not the full legal strategy, but her predicament. She explained that Julian was trying to use his complex finances to shield his true wealth, leaving her and the baby with a fraction of what they were entitled to. She didn't ask Chloe to steal anything. She asked for small, seemingly innocuous pieces of information that only an assistant would know. "I don't need documents, Chloe. I just need to jog my memory. Do you remember which courier service he uses for sensitive international packages? Or the name of the IT consultant who set up his home office network? Did he ever mention taking Serafina to St. Bart's for New Year's?" Each question was a key designed to unlock a different door. Over 2 hours, a hesitant Chloe, fueled by her own resentment towards Julian and a genuine sympathy for Isabella, provided the details. The courier service, the IT guy's name, the fact that the St. Bart's trip, including the charter of a private jet and the rental of a $100,000 a week villa, had been paid for not with a personal credit card, but through an invoice submitted to Monaco Ventures Limited for market research. It was the smoking gun. Armed with this new information, Albright brought in a discreet world-class cybersecurity expert, a ghost who operated in the grey areas of digital forensics. The IT consultant Chloe named had unsurprisingly used a standard, easy-to-guess password for the admin access to Julian's network. Within a day, the expert had slipped past the firewall. He didn't download gigabytes of data. He only retrieved one thing, a digitally signed PDF from Julian, authorizing a capital call from Monaco Ventures to pay a 7-figure invoice to a Los Angeles-based company. Isabella, using her knowledge of the luxury world, investigated the company. It wasn't a PR firm or a business consultancy. It was a front for a bespoke jeweler known for sourcing rare conflict-free colored diamonds. She then found Serafina's Instagram profile, which she had made public the day after the yacht party. There in a photo posted 2 months ago was Serafina wearing a massive canary yellow diamond ring. The caption read, "Feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. He knows how to treat his queen." The pieces were slotting together perfectly, the ring, the saint, Bart's villa, the private jets, all paid for by a corporate entity, not by Julian personally. This wasn't just commingling funds. This was systematic fraud, using the company to finance his affair, and lavish gifts on his mistress, likely writing them off as business expenses. The final piece of the puzzle was the most audacious. Albright hired a team of private investigators in the Cayman Islands. They weren't looking for bank records, which were protected by stringent privacy laws. They were looking for something much more mundane: corporate meeting minutes. By law, every company, even a shell company, is required to hold annual board meetings and keep records. Julian, in his arrogance, had listed himself and his two most trusted and sycophantic VPs as the board members of Monaco Ventures. The investigators, through methods Isabella chose not to question, discovered that in the past 5 years, no board meetings had ever been held. Not one. The legal fiction of the corporation as a separate entity was a complete sham. It didn't act like a company. It acted like Julian Sterling's wallet. After a month of relentless clandestine work, Isabella sat in her hotel suite, the evidence laid out before her on the screen of an encrypted laptop provided by Albright. It was a fortress. Digital records of wire transfers, invoices for personal luxuries billed as corporate expenses, photographic evidence of Serafina enjoying the fruits of that spending, and legal proof that the company itself was a corporate ghost failing to adhere to the most basic governance requirements. She had done it. She had forged the weapon. Professor Albright's face on the video call was grimly satisfied. He built an empire of glass, Isabella, and you have just found the hammer. The question now is, when and where do you choose to strike? Isabella looked out at the lights of Monaco. The humiliation on the yacht felt like a lifetime ago. The woman who had fled in tears was gone. In her place was a strategist, a fighter, a queen in her own right, preparing to checkmate a king who didn't even know he was playing the same game. "Oh, I have an idea about that," she said, a chillingly calm smile touching her lips. "He loves a public spectacle. I think it's only fitting that he gets another one." 2 months passed. To the outside world, Isabella Rossi had vanished. The society pages had their fleeting moment of drama, then moved on. The narrative Julian had so carefully crafted had taken hold, the tragic but necessary end of a youthful marriage, the volatile, emotional wife retreating from the public eye, and the powerful tycoon moving on with a more suitable partner. Julian and Serafina were now the city's ultimate power couple, photographed at every gala, their romance chronicled in breathless detail. Julian, feeling secure, finalized his acquisition of the media conglomerate, a move that made him more powerful than ever. He and his lawyers, satisfied with Isabella's meek compliance, had drawn up the divorce papers. The signing was scheduled to take place privately in a month's time. He believed he had won. He believed Isabella was broken. He was wrong. Isabella was transforming. Her base of operations had shifted from the lonely hotel suite in Monaco to a discreetly rented villa in Lake Como, a place of serene beauty that belied the fury of her preparations. The pregnancy had progressed, and her belly was now a proud, full sphere. The baby's movements were a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. This was not about revenge, she told herself, though the thought of Julian's downfall brought a grim satisfaction. This was about justice. It was about ensuring her child would be born into security, not beholden to the whims of a capricious and cruel father. Professor Albright had assembled a legal dream team, working entirely in the shadows. They had drafted a complaint so explosive, so meticulously documented, that it would not just pierce the corporate veil, but shatter it into dust. They had prepared injunctions to freeze Julian's personal and corporate assets, ready to be filed at a moment's notice. But filing a lawsuit was quiet. It was papers and courtrooms. Isabella wanted something more. Julian had used a public stage to humiliate her. She would use a public stage to decimate him. The opportunity presented itself in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was an invitation to the annual Serenity Gala, the city's most prestigious charity event benefiting the Children's Hospital. For years, Sterling Industries had been the lead sponsor. This year the gala was being chaired by none other than Julian Sterling and his new partner, Serafina. It was to be their official coronation into the city's philanthropic elite. "It's perfect," Isabella said to Albright over their now daily video conference. "It's his stage, his audience, his crowning achievement." "It's incredibly risky, Isabella," Albright cautioned, his brow furrowed. "Confronting him in person in public before we file, it gives him time to react, to hide assets, to countersue. His biggest asset is his reputation." Isabella countered, her voice firm. "His power is built on the myth that he is invincible. I'm not going there to have a shouting match. I'm going there to dismantle that myth brick by brick in front of the very people whose opinions he values most. By the time I'm done, freezing his assets will be a formality." The night of the gala arrived, cloaked in the crisp air of late autumn. The event was held at a grand museum, its neoclassical facade bathed in blue and white lights. A river of black cars flowed towards the entrance, depositing the city's wealthiest and most influential onto a plush red carpet. Julian and Serafina stood just inside the grand hall, greeting their guests. He looked imperious in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. She was a vision in a shimmering gold gown, the infamous yellow diamond on her finger catching the light of the chandeliers. They were the picture of untouchable power and glamour. Isabella arrived, not with a bang, but with a whisper. She stepped out of a simple black car, declining the red carpet, and using a side entrance she had arranged to be opened. She wore no glittering jewels, no couture gown. Instead, she had chosen a dress of sublime, understated elegance, a long-sleeved, high-necked gown of deep emerald green velvet. The fabric clung to her powerful maternal form, a striking silhouette of life and strength. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and her face was adorned with makeup that was subtle yet fierce. She looked not like a victim, but like a warrior queen entering a parley. She didn't immediately seek out Julian. She moved through this cocktail reception with a quiet, deliberate grace. People noticed her. The whispers started instantly. "Is that... I thought she'd left the country. My God, look at her. She's so pregnant." She ignored them, her eyes scanning the room, her mind a chessboard, calculating her next move. She saw Harrison Croft, Julian's lawyer, holding court by the bar. She saw the board members who had rubber-stamped Julian's every decision. She saw the society columnists, their eyes wide with avaricious glee. Her audience was assembled. Finally, she saw him. Julian was laughing, his head thrown back, a glass of champagne in his hand, Serafina gazing at him adoringly. Isabella began to walk towards them. As if sensing a shift in the room's energy, Julian's laughter died. He turned his head, and his eyes met hers across the marble floor. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. He had believed her to be a ghost, and now that ghost was walking toward him, very much alive. Serafina saw the look on his face and turned. Her own expression flickered from triumph to disbelief, then hardened into a mask of pure venom. Isabella stopped a few feet from them. The ambient chatter of the gala seemed to die down in their immediate vicinity, creating a pocket of charged silence. Isabella, Julian said, his voice a low, menacing growl. He recovered quickly, his public smile snapping back into place, though it didn't reach his cold, furious eyes. "What are you doing here? This is a private event." "I was invited," Isabella said calmly, holding up the invitation. "And I believe my donation to the children's hospital is still valid. Or did you cancel that too?" Serafina stepped forward slightly, a protective, possessive gesture. "You're not welcome here. You're making a scene." "Am I?" Isabella's gaze was placid, but her voice was laced with ice. "I haven't even started yet." She turned her full attention to Julian, ignoring Serafina completely. "You look well, Julian. I see the media business agrees with you." And Serafina, but she glanced at the woman dismissively. "That is a stunning ring. A canary yellow, isn't it? At least 10 carats. A truly magnificent gift." Serafina flushed with pride, lifting her hand slightly. "He knows my worth." "Oh, I'm sure he does." Isabella continued, her voice silky smooth. "I would estimate its worth to be approximately $1.7 million. A lovely promotional expense, I imagine." Was that the invoice from LA Diamond Solutions, paid by Monaco Ventures Limited? On January 12th, the color drained from Julian's face. Serafina's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Julian snapped, trying to grab her arm. "This is neither the time nor the place." Isabella stepped back out of his reach. Her voice remained calm, but it rose just enough for those nearby to hear clearly. "Or perhaps we could discuss your market research trip to St. Bart's over New Year's. The villa was lovely. I saw the pictures. Was that a necessary business expense for Monaco Ventures as well? Or was it simply part of wooing your new queen?" A crowd was beginning to form a discreet circle around them. Harrison Croft, the lawyer, was pushing his way through, his face a thundercloud. "Julian," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "Did you know that under Cayman Islands law, a company is required to hold and minute an annual board meeting? It's such a tedious little bit of corporate governance. One you seem to have overlooked for, the last 5 years." Julian was no longer looking shocked. He was looking at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. He finally understood. This was not an emotional outburst. This was a calculated execution. "Harrison," Julian barked at his lawyer, who had just reached his side. "Get her out of here." "I don't think you want to do that," Isabella said, her eyes locking with the lawyer's. "Mr. Croft, I'd advise you to check your email. My legal team, headed by Professor Alistair Albright, sent you a courtesy copy of a complaint we are filing in the New York District Court at 9 a.m. tomorrow. It petitions the court to pierce the corporate veil of Sterling Industries and its subsidiaries based on a pattern of systematic fraud, tax evasion, and the commingling of corporate and personal assets." She let that sink in. She could see the blood drain from Croft's face as he processed the name Alistair Albright. He knew exactly who that was. She took one final step closer to Julian, her voice now for his ears alone. "You built this world to feel powerful, Julian, but it's a house of cards, and you used the wrong card to pay for your mistress." She looked from his ashen face to Serafina's, which was now a mask of dawning horror as she began to comprehend the implications. The yellow diamond on her hand suddenly seemed less like a trophy and more like evidence. Without another word, Isabella turned her back on them. She didn't storm out. She walked with measured, regal steps through the stunned, silent crowd that parted for her like the Red Sea. She had not raised her voice. She had not shed a tear. She had simply delivered the facts. As she reached the grand entrance, she paused and looked back one last time. She saw Julian, his face a mask of incandescent rage, grabbing his phone. She saw Serafina staring at her own ring with dawning terror. She saw Harrison Croft, the shark, looking utterly defeated. The king had been checked, and in the stunned silence of his own coronation party, everyone knew the queen had just won the game. Isabella's perfectly timed grenade at the Serenity Gala triggered an immediate and catastrophic fallout. The next morning, headlines blared the news of the bombshell fraud lawsuit. The complaint was a masterpiece of legal devastation, meticulously detailing Julian's illicit use of corporate funds from Serafina's canary diamond ring, publicly dubbed the Monaco Gate Diamond, to the systematic tax fraud and sham corporate governance. The myth of Julian Sterling, the invincible titan, was shattered overnight. The market's reaction was merciless. Sterling Industries' stock plummeted as panicked investors fled. Injunctions granted almost immediately froze Julian's vast assets. The private jets were grounded, the accounts locked. Trapped in his penthouse, the man who controlled everything suddenly controlled nothing. His power, built on a foundation of fear and reputation, evaporated the moment the world saw him as vulnerable. His queen Serafina proved her loyalty was only as deep as his bank accounts. Faced with a frozen lifestyle and the humiliating glare of the media spotlight, she quickly abandoned the sinking ship. After giving a single self-serving interview where she painted herself as another of Julian's victims, she vanished, leaving him completely alone to face the consequences. Throughout the chaos, Isabella remained silent in Lake Como, a move that amplified her power and earned her the public's admiration as the Velvet Avenger. Faced with irrefutable evidence and total abandonment, Julian was forced to surrender. The settlement wasn't a negotiation. It was an unconditional capitulation. Isabella's terms were precise. She secured a $200 million trust for herself, and her child took sole ownership of the Lake Como villa, and most importantly, forced Julian to step down as CEO of all his companies. He was stripped of his power, the only thing he truly valued. With the deal signed and a gag order silencing him forever, Isabella walked away without a backward glance. The war was over. She had won. 3 weeks later, in a quiet hospital overlooking Lake Como, Isabella gave birth to a daughter, Victoria. Her new life was not one of retreat, but of quiet power, far from the chaos of Julian's self-inflicted ruin. News of his final downfall was swift. Stripped of his CEO title and reputation, he was a pariah forced to sell the Olympian to cover his debts, a king left with nothing but the ruins of his kingdom. Isabella re-entered the world on her own terms. She established the Rossi Foundation, using her immense settlement and legal acumen to empower women escaping financial abuse. She was no longer defined by a man, but by her mission. One afternoon, a text from Julian arrived. "You took everything from me." Isabella looked at her daughter laughing in the sun and felt a profound peace. He was wrong. He hadn't lost everything to her. He had thrown it all away, starting with his family. She deleted the message without replying. The bitter king was a ghost of the past. The true queen was just beginning her reign. From the glittering deck of a super yacht to the silent, commanding presence in a legal war room, Isabella's story is a testament to the fact that true power isn't given. It's forged in fire. She was publicly humiliated, cast aside, and expected to crumble. But her betrayer made one fatal mistake. He forgot who she was. He saw a pregnant wife, not a brilliant mind. He saw a victim, not a warrior. This wasn't just a tale of revenge. It was the story of a reclamation of her name, her strength, and her destiny. She didn't just get even. She built a better kingdom. If her incredible journey from heartbreak to victory captivated you, don't forget to hit that like button. Let us know in the comments which part of Isabella's takedown was the most satisfying. And for more gripping stories of drama, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the empires we topple next.